Who was that? Who was the man you were just with? You'd better have a very good explanation.
The perfume hit me like a slap across the face at 2:17 in the morning. I stood in our kitchen, insomnia gnawing at my gut, watching rainwater streak down the windows of our crumbling Victorian home. The smell wasn't Barbara's usual vanilla-scented nonsense. This was something expensive, something that screamed money and bad decisions. My wife stumbled through the front door, her lipstick smudged like a teenager's after prom night. "Hey, honey," she slurred, not even looking at me as she fumbled with her purse. Her phone buzzed immediately, and she giggled at whatever message lit up her screen. I used to be the punchline to her jokes. Now I was just the joke. "Good girls' night?" I asked, leaning against the counter. My voice carried that edge I'd learned in the Navy. Calm on the surface, dangerous underneath. Barbara finally looked up, her eyes unfocused but calculating. "Yeah, just Taylor and the usual crowd. You know how it is." She was already typing on her phone again, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. "Must have been some party. You smell like a department store perfume counter." Her fingers froze. For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, maybe guilt. Then the mask slipped back into place, and she laughed that brittle laugh I'd grown to hate. "God, John, you're so paranoid. Maybe if you got out more instead of sitting here like some creepy hermit, you'd know what normal people smell like." She brushed past me, her shoulder deliberately knocking into mine. "I'm going to bed." "Without showering?" I called after her. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister so tight her knuckles went white. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just seems like you'd want to wash off the night." Barbara turned around slowly, and I saw the woman I'd married disappear completely. What stood there now was something cold and calculating, something that had been hiding behind smiles and small talk for God knows how long. "Listen to me very carefully, John," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a scream. "I work hard all day at a real job while you play security guard for rich people's empty houses. When I want to blow off steam with my friends, I don't need some washed-up sailor questioning me like I'm a suspect." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Washed-up sailor?" "You heard me. Maybe if you'd actually made something of yourself instead of coasting on some Navy stories from 20 years ago, I wouldn't need to find my fun elsewhere." Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it with a smile that made my stomach turn. "Some of us have evolved past living in the past." The phone kept buzzing. She kept smiling, and something inside my chest cracked like ice on a frozen lake. "Who's texting you at 2:30 in the morning, Barbara?" "Taylor, she's checking to make sure I got home safe, which is more than I can say for my own husband." But her eyes darted away when she said it, and I knew, absolutely knew, she was lying. I watched her climb the stairs, her phone still glowing in her hand, still buzzing with messages from someone who definitely wasn't Taylor. The house settled around us with creaks and groans, like it was as tired of holding us together as I was. Sleep wasn't happening. I knew that much. So I did what any reasonable man would do when his wife came home at 2 in the morning smelling like another man's cologne and lying through her teeth. I fired up her laptop. Barbara thought she was clever, but she'd never served on a submarine where privacy was a luxury and information was survival. Her password was still our wedding anniversary, which would have been touching if she hadn't been using the computer to betray everything that date was supposed to mean. Most of her files were the usual garbage: work documents, photos from girls' nights that looked innocent enough, email chains about neighborhood gossip. But there was one folder that made me pause. HR training materials, it was labeled. Locked with a secondary password. It took me 43 minutes to crack it. I wish I hadn't. The folder contained videos, photos, timestamped digital evidence of my wife's extracurricular activities that made my hands shake and my vision blur. Barbara with a man I didn't recognize in what looked like a hotel room. Barbara in someone's car. Barbara in places and positions that definitely weren't part of any girl's night with Taylor. But it wasn't just the cheating. That would have been devastating enough. No, what made my blood run cold were the timestamps. Every single one corresponded to a night she'd told me she was working late, or out with friends, or at some work function I wasn't invited to. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was systematic, planned, calculated. I was scrolling through months of evidence when I heard her voice drifting down from upstairs. She was on the phone, trying to whisper, but our old house carried sound like a megaphone. No, he doesn't suspect anything, she was saying. He's too weak to even ask the right questions. My finger hovered over the laptop's trackpad, frozen. Trust me, Eric, he'll never figure it out. John spent so long living in his little fantasy world where I'm the perfect wife that he can't see what's right in front of him. She laughed, and it was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard. Besides, even if he did find out, what's he going to do about it? He needs me more than I need him. Eric. So the mystery man had a name. I know, baby. I can't wait either. Just a few more months of playing house, and we can move forward with the plan. He'll never see it coming. The plan. What fucking plan? I closed the laptop as quietly as possible and sat in the dark kitchen, rain still hammering against the windows, trying to process what I just discovered. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning something bigger, something that required months of deception and careful timing. Upstairs, Barbara's voice had gone quiet. A few minutes later, I heard the shower start running, washing off the night, just like I'd suggested. Washing off Eric. I looked around our kitchen, at the dishes I'd washed, the coffee maker I'd programmed for her morning routine, the little notes I still left on the refrigerator like some pathetic optimist who believed in salvaging what we'd built together. 23 years of marriage, 2 decades of thinking I knew the woman sleeping in my bed, and all of it had been a lie recent enough that the digital evidence was still warm. But here's the thing about being a washed-up sailor. We know how to navigate by the stars, even when the sky is falling. And we know that when someone declares war on you, the only reasonable response is to declare war right back. I opened the laptop again and started copying files. If Barbara wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real strategist could do. Ned's auto garage smelled like motor oil, cigarettes, and the kind of honest work that Barbara had spent years telling me wasn't good enough for her social circle. I'd driven there at 5:30 in the morning, my hands still shaking from what I'd discovered, needing to talk to someone who'd known me before I became whatever pathetic version of myself I'd been living as. Jesus, Johnny, you look like hell, Ned said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He'd been my bunkmate on the USS Pittsburgh 25 years ago, and he was one of the few people left who remembered when I used to be someone worth respecting. What's eating you? I told him everything. The perfume, the lies, the laptop, the phone call, the folder full of evidence that my marriage had been a performance art piece designed to make me look like an idiot. Ned listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head, his weathered face growing darker with each detail. That's some cold-blooded shit, brother, he said when I finished. What are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, but I'm done being the fool in this story. Ned cracked his knuckles, a sound like gunshots in the quiet garage. Well, lucky for you, I've got some ideas, and lucky for both of us, I've got the tools to make them happen. The first step was information. If Barbara and this Eric character were planning something that required months of setup, I needed to know what it was before they could execute it. Ned rigged Barbara's car with a GPS tracker so small she'd never notice it, and he showed me how to clone her phone's data to a burner device. This is probably illegal, I said, watching him work. So is adultery in some states. So is fraud if she's planning to clean you out financially. Sometimes you've got to fight fire with fire. He looked up from the tiny electronic device in his hands. Besides, she's the one who chose to make this a war. You're just evening the odds. The GPS tracker revealed patterns that made my stomach churn. Barbara wasn't just meeting Eric. She was visiting lawyers' offices, banks, and real estate agents, all during her supposed work hours, all while telling me she was in meetings or training sessions. The cloned phone data was even worse. Text messages between Barbara and Eric that painted a picture of a relationship that had been going on for over a year. But more disturbing were the messages between Barbara and Taylor, her supposed best friend who'd been helping orchestrate the whole thing. He's such a pathetic loser, one message read. Eric says once we're together, I won't have to pretend anymore. Just stick to the timeline, Taylor had responded. Make sure you document everything that makes him look unstable. The lawyer says emotional misuse claims are easier to prove than people think. Emotional misuse claims. They weren't just planning to leave me, they were planning to destroy me. I screenshotted everything and stored it in 3 different cloud accounts. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what dirty really looked like. The second step was reconnaissance. I started following Barbara using skills I'd learned in the Navy and refined during my years in private security. She met Eric twice a week at a hotel downtown, spent long lunches with Taylor planning God knows what, and had started attending work functions that didn't exist according to her company's public calendar. Eric Landry turned out to be everything I'd expected, and worse. Mid-30s, flashy clothes, driving a Tesla that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. He worked for some tech startup that seemed to exist primarily to help him feel important while burning through investor money. The kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked loudly on his phone in restaurants to make sure everyone knew how successful he was. But success built on venture capital and BS had a tendency to be fragile, and fragile things broke easily when you knew where to apply pressure. I spent a week learning Eric's routines, where he ate lunch, where he worked out, where he got his hair cut. The man was a creature of habit, which made him predictable. And predictable enemies were vulnerable enemies. The third step was building a network. Barbara thought she had all the allies, but she'd underestimated how much people in our neighborhood loved gossip and how little they actually liked her. Miss Kelsey, our next-door neighbor, had been watching Barbara's comings and goings for years with the dedication of a professional surveillance expert. "I always knew something was off about that girl," she told me over coffee in her kitchen, her eyes bright with the thrill of being included in real drama. "Too many late nights, too many new clothes, too many stories that didn't add up. You want to know what I've seen? Because, honey, I've seen plenty." Miss Kelsey had been documenting Barbara's affairs without even realizing it. Photos of strange cars in our driveway when I wasn't home. Notes about when Barbara left and returned. Even a few pictures of Barbara and Eric together that she'd taken because that man looked suspicious. "I've got a whole folder," she said proudly. "I was saving it for the right moment." The right moment had arrived. The fourth step was psychological warfare. I started leaving little signs that I knew more than I was letting on. I'd mention details about Barbara's day that she hadn't told me, ask innocent questions about her coworkers that made her nervous, and casually bring up topics related to divorce and infidelity during dinner conversation. "Did you see that story in the news about the woman who lost everything in her divorce because she was cheating?" I'd ask, watching her face carefully. Apparently, the husband had been gathering evidence for months. She thought she was so smart, but he was always one step ahead. Barbara would laugh it off, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. The paranoia was setting in, just like I'd hoped. The fifth step was recruitment. Jenna, one of Barbara's coworkers, had always seemed different from the others. Quieter, more observant, less impressed by Barbara's performance as the perfect career woman. I arranged to bump into her at the coffee shop near their office building. "I am probably overstepping," I said after some small talk, "but I'm worried about Barbara. She's been acting strange lately, working late all the time, stressed about things she won't talk about. Has she seemed okay to you at work?" Jenna's expression shifted, and I knew I'd hit something. "Actually," she said carefully, "I've been wondering about that too. She's been taking a lot of personal calls during work hours, and there have been some inconsistencies in her schedule." Inconsistencies? Days when she's supposed to be in meetings that aren't on the company calendar? Expenses that don't match up with actual business activities? I handle some of the administrative work, so I notice these things. She paused, studying my face. "John, I think there might be something you should know." Jenna had been watching Barbara's deception from the inside, and she was disgusted by what she'd seen. Not just the affair, but the way Barbara talked about me to anyone who would listen. The jokes, the complaints, the casual cruelty of someone who'd already checked out of a marriage but was too cowardly to end it honestly. "She's been telling people you're controlling and paranoid," Jenna told me. "Setting up a narrative in case things go bad. I think she's planning something, and I don't think it's going to be fair to you." By the end of the week, I had a clearer picture of what Barbara and Eric were planning. They wanted to be together, but they also wanted to make sure Barbara came out of our divorce with as much of my money and property as possible. The emotional misuse angle was their strategy. Paint me as an unstable, controlling husband who'd made Barbara's life miserable, then use that narrative to justify taking everything. It was a good plan. It might have even worked if they'd been dealing with the man I used to be. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that the only way to deal with people who declared war on you was to hit back twice as hard. I was sitting in Ned's garage finalizing the details of my counterattack when my phone buzzed with a text message from Barbara. "Working late tonight? Don't wait up." I checked the GPS tracker. She was at the hotel with Eric. "You ready to do this?" Ned asked, looking up from the equipment he'd been preparing. I thought about 23 years of marriage. about trust and loyalty and all the things I'd believed in that had turned out to be illusions. I thought about Barbara laughing with Eric about how weak and pathetic I was. I thought about the folder full of evidence and the plan to destroy me. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. The war was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't planning to lose. The Slipway was the kind of dive bar where secrets went to die and gossip went to multiply. Located right on the waterfront, it attracted a mix of dock workers, retirees, and locals who'd been drinking there since before craft beer was a thing. More importantly, it was where half the town came to hear and spread the latest rumors about who was sleeping with whom. I'd been planning this moment for 2 weeks, ever since I'd started gathering intelligence on Barbara's operation. If she wanted to control the narrative about our marriage, she'd have to compete with the truth. And in a small coastal town like ours, the truth had a way of spreading faster than wildfire. Ned and I took seats at the bar on a Thursday night, right in the middle of the local gossip network. Miss Kelsey was there, of course, holding court at a corner table with 3 other neighborhood watch types. Taylor was there too, which was perfect. She'd been Barbara's co-conspirator, but she was also the town's biggest mouth. "So how's married life treating you, Johnny?" asked Pete, the bartender who'd been serving drinks and collecting secrets for 30 years. "Oh, you know how it is," I said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Barbara's been working so hard lately. All these late meetings, weekend conferences, business trips. Sometimes I barely see her." Miss Kelsey's ears perked up like a bloodhound catching a scent. "Business trips? I thought she worked local." "That's what I thought too, but apparently her company's been expanding. She's been traveling to Portland a lot, sometimes staying overnight." I took a sip of my beer and shrugged. I guess I just didn't realize how ambitious she was. This was carefully crafted BS, of course. Barbara hadn't been on any business trips. She'd been at the downtown hotel with Eric. But the beauty of starting rumors in a place like the Slipway was that you didn't need to lie directly. You just needed to plant seeds and let other people's imaginations do the work. Overnight trips? This from Martha, Miss Kelsey's best friend and the neighborhood's unofficial information clearinghouse. "That's interesting. I could have sworn I saw her car in your driveway Tuesday night when you were supposed to be working late." I let confusion cross my face, like I was trying to work out a puzzle. "Tuesday? She told me she was in Portland Tuesday night." The silence that followed was beautiful. I could practically see the gears turning in everyone's heads, connecting dots that painted a picture Barbara definitely didn't want painted. "Maybe I was mistaken," Martha said, but her tone suggested she knew exactly what she'd seen. Taylor, who'd been listening from across the bar, suddenly appeared at my elbow. "John, hey! I didn't see you come in." Her smile was bright and fake, the kind of expression people wore when they were trying to do damage control. "Taylor, good to see you. I was just telling everyone how impressed I am with Barbara's work ethic lately. All those girls' nights you two have been having must be really energizing for her." Taylor's smile flickered. "Girls' nights?" "Yeah, she's been going out with you twice a week for the past few months. Says it's the only thing keeping her sane with all the stress at work." I looked genuinely grateful. "I really appreciate you being such a good friend to her during this busy time." The problem with being part of a conspiracy is that you have to keep track of all the lies, and Taylor clearly hadn't prepared for this conversation. Her face went through several expressions before settling on confused panic. "Oh, right. Those nights? Yeah, it's been good for her to get out." "Where do you two usually go? Barbara never gives me details, just says she's going out with Taylor and she'll be back late." Now Taylor looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor because, of course, she and Barbara hadn't been having girls' nights. Barbara had been using Taylor as an alibi while she was with Eric, and Taylor had been covering for her. But Taylor couldn't say that without admitting to the lie, and she couldn't give specifics about nights that had never happened. We just, different places, around town. Miss Kelsey was watching this exchange like it was better than cable television. "That's so nice that you girls stay in touch. What's your favorite spot?" Taylor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The longer she took to answer, the more obvious it became that she was scrambling for something to say. "We like to try new places," she finally managed. "Any recommendations?" I asked innocently. "Maybe Barbara and I could go to one of your spots for date night. They're more girl-friendly places. You probably wouldn't like them." Ned, who'd been quietly nursing his beer and watching the show, decided to join the fun. What kind of places are girl-friendly, but not guy-friendly? I'm genuinely curious. Taylor looked around the bar like she was searching for an escape route. I should probably get going. Early day tomorrow. She practically ran for the door, leaving behind a bar full of people who'd just watched someone fail to lie convincingly about something that should have been simple to explain. That was weird, Martha observed. Very weird, Miss Kelsey agreed. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was covering for something. I finished my beer and stood up to leave. I'm sure it's nothing. Barbara's always been private about her social life. Maybe she just doesn't want me knowing all the details about girl talk. But I could see the doubt in everyone's eyes. The seeds were planted, and they'd grow on their own now. By tomorrow, half the neighborhood would be wondering what Barbara Walker was really doing on her twice-weekly girls' nights with Taylor, and why Taylor couldn't give a straight answer about where they went. The next phase of my plan required more direct action. I'd been tracking Barbara's movements for weeks, and I knew she and Eric had a standing appointment every Friday afternoon at the Ocean View Hotel downtown. What I needed was evidence that would be impossible to deny or explain away. I positioned myself in the hotel bar at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase like I was there for a business meeting. The lobby had a clear view of the elevators, and I'd brought a camera with a telephoto lens that could capture faces from across the room. Barbara arrived first, looking around nervously before approaching the front desk. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something expensive and red that definitely wasn't appropriate for any work function. She got a key card and headed for the elevators. Eric showed up 10 minutes later, cocky and obvious in his designer clothes and flashy watch. He didn't bother with the front desk, just headed straight for the elevators like he owned the place. I got photos of both of them, time-stamped and crystal clear. Barbara entering the hotel at 4:47 p.m., Eric following at 4:58 p.m., both of them looking guilty as hell. But photos weren't enough. I needed something that would destroy their narrative completely, something that would make it impossible for Barbara to paint herself as the victim of an unhappy marriage. I needed to hear what they really thought about me. The hotel room walls were thin, and the room next to theirs was empty. It took me 15 minutes and a credit card to get inside, and another 5 minutes to set up the recording equipment Ned had provided. Nothing illegal, just a device that could pick up conversations through shared walls, the kind of thing private investigators used all the time. What I heard made my hands shake with rage. God, I can't wait until this is over, Barbara was saying. Living with him is like being married to a ghost. He just sits around the house feeling sorry for himself. Just a few more months, baby, Eric replied. Once the lawyer has everything in place, you can take him for everything he's worth, and we can start our real life together. I almost feel bad about it. Almost. But then I remember how pathetic he's become, and I think maybe I'm doing him a favor. At least this way he'll have to figure out how to be a real man instead of coasting on old Navy stories. They laughed together, and it was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard. The best part is he has no idea, Eric continued. He's so trusting, so naive. He actually believes you're working late and going out with girlfriends. It's almost too easy. Taylor thinks we're being too obvious, but I keep telling her. John sees what he wants to see. He's invested in the fantasy of our perfect marriage. Even if he caught us together, he'd probably find a way to explain it away. More laughter, more casual cruelty from the woman I'd loved for over 20 years. What happens if he does figure it out? Eric asked. He won't. But even if he did, what's he going to do? He needs me more than I need him. Without me, he's just a washed-up ex-sailor playing security guard. He doesn't have the backbone to fight back. I turned off the recording device and sat in the empty hotel room, listening to the sounds of my wife's betrayal through the thin wall, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. She was wrong about one thing. I did have the backbone to fight back. And she was about to find out exactly what a washed-up ex-sailor could do when someone declared war on everything he'd ever cared about. The real battle was just beginning. The annual Founders' Day festival was exactly the kind of small-town event that Barbara normally avoided. Too many ordinary people, not enough opportunities to network with the kind of successful professionals she preferred. But this year, I convinced her we should go together, play the happy couple, show the community that the Walkers were still solid, despite all the gossip that had been circulating. I don't understand why you care what these people think, she said, as we walked through the festival grounds past booths selling funnel cakes and local crafts. Half of them are unemployed fishermen, and the other half are retirees with nothing better to do than gossip. These people are our neighbors, Barbara. We have to live here. She rolled her eyes, but she played along, smiling and waving at people we'd known for years. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the past week preparing for this moment, setting up what would either be the most satisfying revenge of my life or the most spectacular failure. The festival's main stage was set up for local bands and community announcements, but it also had a large screen for displaying photos and videos of the town's history. I'd volunteered to help with the technical setup, which gave me access to the projection system and a legitimate reason to be handling electronic equipment. Eric showed up around noon, which surprised me. He usually avoided local events like they were contagious, but there he was, wearing expensive casual clothes and looking around like he was slumming it in a foreign country. "What's he doing here?" Barbara muttered when she spotted him. "Who?" "Eric Landry, from the tech company. I didn't expect to see him at something like this." I watched her face carefully. She was nervous, which was interesting. If Eric was just some random guy from her work, why would his presence at a public event make her uncomfortable? "Maybe he's trying to connect with the community," I suggested. "Build relationships for his business?" "Maybe." But she kept glancing in his direction, and I could see the wheels turning. They'd been so careful to keep their affair secret, meeting at hotels and restaurants in other towns. Having Eric show up at a local event where everyone would see them together was dangerous to their carefully constructed lies. What Barbara didn't know was that I'd been the one to suggest Eric attend the festival. It had taken 3 anonymous emails to his company about community engagement opportunities and local networking events, but I'd managed to plant the idea that showing up at Founders Day would be good for his professional image. The first phase of my plan activated at 1 o'clock, when Miss Kelsey approached us near the beer tent. "John, Barbara, so good to see you two together. You make such a lovely couple." She beamed at us like a grandmother at a wedding. "Barbara, dear, I was just talking to Taylor, and she mentioned how much fun you two have been having on your girls' nights. She was telling everyone about that new restaurant you discovered." Barbara's smile froze. "New restaurant?" "The one in Portland. Taylor said it was your idea to try it, and now it's become your regular spot for your weekly dinners." I watched Barbara's face go pale. Because, of course, there was no regular spot in Portland. There were no weekly dinners with Taylor. There were just lies that were starting to unravel in public. "I think there might be some confusion," Barbara said carefully. "Oh, I don't think so. Taylor was very specific. She said you two go there every Tuesday night, and the seafood is amazing." Miss Kelsey looked genuinely puzzled by Barbara's reaction. Did I get something wrong? This was beautiful. I hadn't coached Miss Kelsey to say any of this. She was just repeating gossip that had evolved and mutated as it spread through the community. Someone had heard that Barbara was going out twice a week. Someone else had assumed it was with Taylor, and by the time the story reached Miss Kelsey, it had become a specific restaurant and a regular schedule. "Taylor must have been talking about someone else," Barbara managed. "But she specifically said Barbara Walker. How many Barbara Walkers can there be in a town this size?" Miss Kelsey laughed at her own joke, completely oblivious to the panic in Barbara's eyes. "I decided to help my wife out of her predicament. Maybe we should find Taylor and clear this up. I'd hate for there to be confusion about where Barbara's spending her evenings." "Great idea." Miss Kelsey clapped her hands together. "She's right over there by the ring toss game." We walked over as a group, Barbara looking like she was heading to her own execution. Taylor saw us coming and immediately tried to blend into the crowd, but Miss Kelsey called out to her. "Taylor, we were just talking about that wonderful restaurant you and Barbara discovered in Portland. What was the name again?" Taylor's face went through the same progression of expressions I'd seen at the slipway: confusion, panic, and desperate calculation. She looked at Barbara, then at me, then at Miss Kelsey's expectant face. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said finally. "About the restaurant. About everything." Taylor took a deep breath, and I could see her making a decision. "Barbara and I haven't been having regular dinners. I think someone got their wires crossed." Miss Kelsey looked genuinely confused now. "But you told me." "I think I might have misspoken, or maybe you misheard. But Barbara and I definitely haven't been going to Portland together." The silence that followed was deafening. Barbara stared at Taylor like she'd been slapped. Miss Kelsey looked back and forth between them, trying to understand why a simple question about restaurants had created such obvious tension. Well, Miss Kelsey said finally, I guess I was mistaken. Sorry for the confusion. She walked away, but I could see her brain working, filing this interaction away for future analysis. By tonight, she'd be on the phone with Martha and the rest of the neighborhood watch, dissecting every word and expression. Taylor, Barbara said quietly, can I talk to you for a minute? They walked a few steps away, but I could still hear Barbara's angry whispers. What the hell was that about? I panicked, okay? She was asking specific questions about things that never happened. What was I supposed to say? You were supposed to back up my story. What story? You never told me what story I was supposed to tell? I pretended to be interested in the ring toss game while I listened to my wife's conspiracy falling apart in real time. The beautiful thing about lies was that they required constant maintenance, and Barbara had been so focused on deceiving me that she'd forgotten to keep her co-conspirators properly briefed. Phase 2 of my plan activated at 2:30 when the festival's historical presentation began. The large screen lit up with photos from the town's past. Old fishing boats, historical buildings, community events from decades gone by. What the audience didn't know was that I had loaded additional content into the presentation system. Nothing obvious, nothing that would immediately scream sabotage. Just a few extra slides that would appear to be technical glitches. The first glitch was a photo of Barbara and Eric entering the Ocean View Hotel, time-stamped from the previous Friday. It flashed on screen for maybe 3 seconds before being replaced by a historical photo of the town's founding fathers. Most people probably thought it was a mistake, a random photo that had gotten mixed in with the historical content. But a few people who knew Barbara and had been following the gossip, definitely noticed. The second glitch was even better. A screenshot of text messages between Barbara and Eric, with their names clearly visible, discussing their next meeting. Again, it only appeared for a few seconds, but it was long enough for people to read and process what they were seeing. By the time the third glitch appeared, a photo of Barbara and Eric kissing in a restaurant parking lot, the murmur from the crowd made it clear that people understood they weren't looking at technical mistakes. Barbara grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. We need to leave, now. Why? It's just getting interesting. John, please, I'm not feeling well. But it was too late to make a graceful exit. People were staring at us, whispering to each other, putting together the pieces of a puzzle that painted a very clear picture of what Barbara Walker had been doing during her supposed girls' nights and work functions. Eric, who'd been standing near the stage, looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. His expensive clothes and flashy watch suddenly seemed ridiculous in a crowd of people who now knew exactly what kind of man he was. Barbara, I said loudly enough for nearby people to hear, isn't that your co-worker, Eric? Should we go say hello? She looked at me with pure hatred. Don't what? Don't be friendly to your colleagues? I thought you were always telling me I should be more social. I started walking toward Eric, with Barbara trailing behind me like she was being dragged to her own funeral. The crowd parted as we approached, everyone watching to see what would happen when the betrayed husband confronted his wife's lover in public. Eric saw us coming and tried to back away, but he was trapped against the stage with nowhere to go. Eric, I called out cheerfully. Great to see you here. I'm John Walker, Barbara's husband. I extended my hand for a handshake, and Eric had no choice but to take it. His palm was sweaty, and I could feel him trembling. Nice to meet you, he managed. Barbara's told me so much about you. Well, actually, she hasn't told me anything about you, which is interesting now that I think about it. I kept smiling, but I tightened my grip on his hand. She's usually very chatty about her coworkers. We don't work together directly, Eric said, trying to pull his hand free. No, that's strange, because I have some photos that suggest you two spend a lot of time together. I finally released his hand and pulled out my phone. Would you like to see them? Eric's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. I swiped through the photos I'd taken at the hotel, holding the phone so that several nearby people could see the screen. Here you are last Friday at the Ocean View, and here's Barbara arriving a few minutes earlier. Quite a coincidence. The crowd had gone completely silent now, everyone straining to hear what was happening. Barbara looked like she was about to be sick. It's not what it looks like, Eric said weakly. Really? Because it looks like you've been fucking my wife for the past year, while she tells me she's working late or having girls' nights with Taylor. My voice carried across the festival grounds. and I saw people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. "John, stop," Barbara whispered. "Stop what? Stop telling the truth? Stop asking questions? Stop being the naive, trusting husband who believes everything his wife tells him." I looked around at the crowd, making eye contact with people I'd known for years. Because that's what I've been, folks. The fool who didn't realize his wife was playing house with some tech company pretty boy while I was working nights to pay for her lifestyle. Eric tried to push past me, but I stepped sideways to block him. He was taller than me, but soft, the kind of man who'd never been in a real fight in his life. "Where are you going, Eric? The conversation's just getting started." "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do. See, when you decide to destroy someone's marriage, you don't get to walk away when the conversation gets uncomfortable." I smiled at him, and I could see my expression reflected in his eyes, cold, calculating, dangerous. "You wanted to play games with my life. Now we're going to play games with yours." That's when Eric made his mistake. Maybe it was panic, maybe it was embarrassment, or maybe he was just tired of being confronted by someone he'd been taught to think of as weak and pathetic. But he put his hand on my chest and tried to shove me aside. I'd been hoping he'd do something exactly that stupid. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it just enough to cause pain without breaking anything, and used his own momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the side of the stage. It happened so fast that most of the crowd probably didn't see the details, just Eric suddenly pressed against the wooden platform with his arm twisted behind his back. "Here's the thing about us washed-up sailors, Eric," I said quietly, my mouth close to his ear. "We know how to fight, and we know how to win." I released him and stepped back, leaving him gasping and humiliated in front of half the town. His expensive shirt was torn, his designer sunglasses were broken on the ground, and his carefully styled hair was disheveled. "John." Barbara grabbed my arm again. "What is wrong with you?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger, someone who'd been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, pretending to be my partner while systematically planning my destruction. "What's wrong with me?" I laughed, and it was a sound I'd never heard myself make before. "What's wrong with me is that I trusted you. What's wrong with me is that I believed in us. What's wrong with me is that I thought 23 years of marriage meant something." The crowd was completely silent now, everyone watching the final act of a marriage dissolving in real time. "But you know what, Barbara? I'm not wrong anymore. I'm not naive anymore. And I'm definitely not weak anymore." I looked around at the faces staring at us. Neighbors, friends, people who'd known us as a couple for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I'd like you all to meet the real Barbara Walker, cheating wife, lying manipulator, and soon-to-be ex-Mrs. John Walker." I turned and walked away, leaving Barbara and Eric standing in the wreckage of their secret relationship, exposed and humiliated in front of everyone who mattered in our small town. Behind me, I could hear Barbara calling my name, but I didn't look back. The war wasn't over yet, but I just won the most important battle, and everyone in town now knew which side they should be on. The phone call came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the festival disaster. Barbara's voice was different, smaller, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "John, we need to talk, please. I know you hate me, but there are things you don't understand." I'd been expecting this call. After the public humiliation at Founders Day, Barbara and Eric had tried to lay low, but small towns don't allow for anonymity. Every grocery store trip, every gas station stop, every public appearance had become an exercise in facing people who knew exactly what they'd done. "What's to understand, Barbara? You've been cheating on me for over a year while planning to take me for everything I'm worth in a divorce. Seems pretty straightforward." "It's not that simple, Eric. He's not who I thought he was, and Taylor—" Her voice broke. "John, I think I'm in real trouble." This was interesting. What kind of trouble? "Can we meet somewhere private? I'll explain everything." I suggested the Seaside Motel, a rundown place on the outskirts of town that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. It was the perfect location for the final act of our marriage. Seedy, anonymous, and appropriately dramatic. What Barbara didn't know was that I'd been planning this confrontation for weeks, ever since Jenna had provided me with the final piece of information I needed to destroy not just Barbara's marriage, but her entire life. I arrived at the motel first and rented a room on the second floor with a view of the parking lot. Ned was positioned across the street with a camera and a police scanner. Miss Kelsey was in the motel office, having volunteered to help the elderly owner with his bookkeeping for the evening. and Jenna was parked at the diner next door, ready to make some very important phone calls when I gave her the signal. Barbara showed up 20 minutes late, driving her car like she was afraid someone might be following her. She looked terrible, exhausted, paranoid, like someone who'd been living on stress and caffeine for weeks. She climbed the stairs to room 237 and knocked on the door with shaking hands. "Thank you for coming," she said when I let her in. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a place like the seaside. Worn carpet, faded wallpaper, and the lingering smell of cigarettes and desperation. "You said you were in trouble. What kind of trouble?" Barbara sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. "Eric's been lying to me about everything, his job, his money, his intentions. John, I think he's been using me." "Using you how?" "He's been having me steal information from your security company. Client lists, schedules, financial records. He said it was for his business, that he was trying to break into the security market." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "But I found out yesterday that he's been selling that information to people who rob the houses you're supposed to be protecting." I kept my face neutral, but inside I was celebrating. This was even better than I'd hoped. "You're telling me you've been helping Eric rob my clients?" "I didn't know. I thought I was helping him with legitimate business research. But yesterday I saw a news report about a break-in at the Morrison house, and I realized, John, they knew exactly when the family would be gone, exactly where the security cameras were positioned, exactly which rooms had the most valuable items. The Morrison break-in had been all over the local news, a sophisticated burglary that had cleaned out a wealthy family's home while they were at their daughter's wedding. The thieves had avoided every security measure like they'd had inside information, which apparently they had. And Taylor? Taylor's been blackmailing me. She has photos, recordings, evidence of the affair. She said if I didn't pay her $10,000, she'd send everything to you and to my boss. Barbara's voice was barely a whisper now. "John, I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my reputation. And now I might go to jail for helping Eric with his burglary ring." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when Barbara finally understood that actions had consequences, that betraying someone's trust came with a price that couldn't be calculated in advance. "So why are you telling me this?" "Because I need your help. You're the only person who might be willing to listen, who might understand that I made mistakes, but I'm not a criminal." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. Ned was still in position, and I could see Miss Kelsey's car in the motel office lot. Everything was ready. "Barbara, do you remember what you said about me the night I found out about your affair?" "John, please. You said I was weak. You said I didn't have the backbone to fight back. You said I was a pathetic loser who would never amount to anything." I turned around to face her. "Do you remember that?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Well, you were wrong about one thing. I do have the backbone to fight back, and tonight you're going to find out exactly what that means." I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Jenna. "Now." Within minutes, the parking lot began filling up with cars. Miss Kelsey emerged from the motel office and started directing traffic like she was managing a premiere. Ned appeared with his camera equipment. And then the real guests started arriving. Detective Morrow from the local police department, Barbara's boss from the tech company, several of our neighbors, including Martha and the rest of the gossip network, even a reporter from the local newspaper, someone Jenna had tipped off about a major breaking story. "John, what's happening?" Barbara asked, panic creeping into her voice. "You're about to face the consequences of your choices. All of them." The first knock on the door came 5 minutes later. Detective Morrow, looking official and serious. "Mrs. Walker, I need to speak with you about some information that's come to light regarding recent burglaries in the area." Barbara looked at me with pure terror. "You called the police?" "I didn't have to. Jenna did that. Turns out, when you steal information from a security company and people get robbed, that's called conspiracy to commit burglary. It's a felony, Barbara." The second knock came before she could respond, her boss looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Barbara, we need to discuss your employment status. There have been some serious allegations about misuse of company resources and unauthorized access to confidential information." "I can explain." "Actually, you can't. We've been conducting an internal investigation for the past week, and we've found evidence that you've been accessing files and systems you had no authorization to use. Your employment is terminated effective immediately, and we'll be cooperating fully with law enforcement." The third knock was the most satisfying. Eric, looking like he'd been dragged there against his will, flanked by two police officers. "Barbara, what the hell is going on?" he demanded. "The cops showed up at my apartment with a warrant. They're saying I'm part of some burglary ring." "Because you are," Detective Morrow said calmly. "We have evidence that you've been purchasing stolen information and selling it to individuals who use that information to commit burglaries. We also have evidence that Mrs. Walker was your source for that information." Eric's face went white. "That's impossible. Barbara, tell them that's not true." But Barbara couldn't tell them anything because it was true. She'd been stealing information from my company and giving it to Eric, who'd been selling it to criminals. The only thing she'd been wrong about was thinking Eric was using her. Actually, they'd been using each other, and now they were both going to pay the price. The room was getting crowded now. Detective Morrow, Barbara's ex-boss, Eric, two uniformed police officers, and a growing crowd of onlookers in the parking lot below. The reporter was taking notes and photos, documenting the collapse of what had once been considered one of the town's more successful couples. "There's something else you should know, Barbara," I said, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. "Taylor isn't blackmailing you." "What?" "Taylor's been working with me for the past 2 weeks. All those photos and recordings she threatened you with, I already had copies. The blackmail was just psychological pressure to make you desperate enough to confess to your crimes." Barbara stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "That's impossible. Taylor's my friend. Taylor's an opportunist. When she realized your affair was going to become public knowledge, she decided to switch sides. Turns out, being friends with the town pariah isn't good for your social standing." As if on cue, Taylor appeared in the doorway, looking sheepish but determined. "I'm sorry, Barbara, but I had to think about my own reputation. What you and Eric were doing, it was wrong. And when John told me about the burglaries, I knew I had to help him stop you." The look on Barbara's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Complete and total betrayal by someone she'd trusted, someone she thought was on her side. "But the best part," I continued, "is what Jenna discovered yesterday." Jenna stepped into the room holding a folder full of documents. "Barbara, I've been going through the company's financial records and I found some interesting discrepancies. It looks like you've been embezzling money from the Employee Benefits Fund to pay for your hotel meetings with Eric." "That's not true." "It's completely true. Small amounts over the past 8 months, always timed to coincide with your affair. You thought no one would notice a few $100s here and there, but it adds up. We're talking about nearly $15,000 in stolen funds." Detective Morrow looked at his notes. "So we have conspiracy to commit burglary, theft of proprietary information, and embezzlement. Mrs. Walker, you're going to need to come with us." Barbara looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. Police officers, her former boss, her former lover, her former best friend, and the husband she'd betrayed and underestimated. "John, please, we can work this out. I'll do anything." "You're right, Barbara. You will do anything. You'll do anything to save yourself. Just like you did anything to get what you wanted from Eric. Just like you did anything to try to destroy me in our divorce." I stepped closer to her, close enough that only she could hear what I said next. "But here's the thing about consequences. They don't care what you're willing to do. They only care about what you've already done." The police officers moved forward to arrest Barbara, reading her rights while she sobbed and begged and promised to make everything right. Eric was already in handcuffs, his expensive clothes and flashy watch looking ridiculous now that everyone knew he was just another criminal. As they led Barbara down the stairs, she looked back at me one last time. "I loved you," she said. "No," I replied. "You loved what I could provide for you. There's a difference." The crowd in the parking lot parted as the police cars drove away, taking Barbara and Eric to face the consequences of their choices. The reporter was interviewing witnesses. The neighbors were already planning how they'd spread this story throughout the community, and Miss Kelsey was practically glowing with the satisfaction of being part of the biggest scandal the town had seen in years. I stood on the motel balcony, looking down at the scene below, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Barbara had been wrong about me. I wasn't weak, I wasn't pathetic, and I definitely wasn't someone who could be destroyed without fighting back. I was someone who understood that revenge was a dish best served cold, with a side of public humiliation and a garnish of felony charges. The marriage was over, the war was won, and Barbara Walker, soon to be just Barbara again, would spend the next few years learning that some mistakes couldn't be undone with tears and apologies. I walked back into the motel room, picked up my jacket, and headed home to start the next chapter of my life. The chapter where I was no longer anyone's fool.